Welcome back again to another GWT tutorial, and in this tutorial I'll be continuing on the remote procedure call topic with regards to complex data types. The reason for that being is because in my previous tutorial I've shown a very simple example of remote procedure calls, but one of the things that I left open-ended is what to do if we have two remote procedure calls that are returning the same data type but are representing different actions on the screen, and how does this remote procedure call handling relate back to what we do on the screen. So in this tutorial I'll be answering those questions, and as usual I'll start with a presentation. So there we go. So as I said, we're going to be talking about remote procedure call with complex data types, part 2 in this case. So what did I do in the previous tutorial? Well, I've demonstrated how complex data objects can be returned using RPC. And in this example that I did, I showed all the data returned from the remote procedure calls on the same screen, which doesn't really represent the actual situation as we would develop it in applications. So what am I going to do today? Well, today I'm going to elaborate on the previous tutorial by demonstrating how the GUI can respond to the data returned from a remote procedure call, even if the data type is the same. So in other words, if there's two strings coming back or two person objects coming back, which is the example I'll be using, how can I make my GUI respond to that differently? So other than that, I'm going to be using the same architecture as last time. So I'm going to have my GUI, which is going to use a client implementation class, which is defined in the client interface, which makes RPC calls through the servers and servers async interfaces to the server side. So the RPC methods in this case will still return objects based on whatever data is coming back, or more or less the data coming back in a certain event object. The GUI will respond differently. One of the alternative approaches to what I'm going to demonstrate today would be have a different callback for every RPC method. Basically, if you make an RPC call and you have a specific callback for that method, updating your GUI in a certain way, you're actually accomplishing the same thing. However, this approach does not have my preference because it's very tedious. When you write a big application, you will eventually end up with a lot of RPC methods, which also means you have a lot of callbacks. So in this case I prefer to use the default callback handler that I created in my previous example, and segregating between what action has to take place is something I will do via so-called event objects. So what are these event objects that I keep on mentioning? Well, let me just explain you that with a metaphor. So imagine we have page 1 and page 2, who are both going to contact the server to make a certain request for information. Let's say, for example, a person information. The server has this information and knows that it has to reply it to page 1 and page 2. But the question is, which request is going to end up at page 1 and page 2. Fortunately, the server can use a little trick for that. So the server is going to send the information requested by page 1 and page 2 to the main view above it. And if you can't remember what the main view is, please refer to my GUI tutorial. So the information sent back for page 1, for example, is going to be in a blue envelope, and the information for page 2 is going to be in a yellow envelope. The main view receives both envelopes and knows that, hey, the blue envelope has to go to page 1, the yellow envelope has to go to page 2. So regardless of the fact that the server is returning the same data to be used by page 1 and page 2, by wrapping it in a event object, or envelope in this metaphor, I know which page has to receive this information. So in this particular case, to dig a little bit deeper in what I'm going to do today, I'm going to be building a simple app which displays person information. Displays person information, updates person information. And No, yeah, that's exactly what I said just now. So in this particular case, I am going to use a certain data structure for my events. So I'm going to have my person object on the left hand side, which is going to contain a string, a string name, an integer age, and a string gender, and the necessary get and set methods. And I'm going to, depending on whether or not the information is just received or the information is sent back after a update, I'm going to wrap it in a data event object, or object that inherits from data event. So in this particular case, I'm going to create one event, person retrieved event, for the simple retrieval of the data. The person updated event for if their person data is returned as part of an update, and both inherit from the data event. In other words, the data event would be, for example, a envelope, while the person retrieved event would be a blue envelope, and the person updated event would be a yellow envelope. The main view obviously would only be concerned with receiving envelopes or objects of the type data event. Don't worry if this is a little bit confusing at this point. It will hopefully be more clear later on when I'm doing this in code. And having said that, I'll straight away go to that code. So let's go to Eclipse. In this particular case, I have already created a GWT project. This is mostly for time restraints, because in my previous tutorial I've already shown how to set up basic RPC with all the interfaces and all the classes involved. So like I said, in this case I'm going to maintain the same architecture, but I'm going to focus on returning complex data types of the same data type. So before I'm going to show the code, I am just going to show what the program does. So let's just run it and go to my Chrome. So in this particular application, and as you can notice, I've not used any particular GUI or fancy GUI things. I simply created the controls. So in this particular application, I am displaying a person information, in this case Mr. Jack Harkness, age 38, male. And this Jack Harkness is information I can edit by going to my edit page. For example, Jack Harkness to Jack Sparrow, age 42, and save. Normally if I press the save button, it would actually make a RPC call and update the whatever database I'm simulating. In this particular case it doesn't do anything. It will simply tell me that the person info has been saved, and the back button doesn't do anything either. So let me first just show you how I've built this in code. So in this particular case I have my main view, and as you may remember, main view actually means GUI. Make it a little bit bigger, in which I have the necessary GUI code. I have a method for opening the person info page, which is basically receiving a person object to display. And for that reason, when the main view is loaded, the main view actually is making an RPC call through my listener class, my client implementation class. When the data returns, I can open the person info page. I have some code to open the person edit page, in which I'm creating the person info edit page object. And I have a method for opening the page that indicates that the person data has been saved. Naturally, I have my getListener method here, which basically can be used by different widgets to make RPC calls, also in line with the architecture. Okay, so looking at the actual RPC methods, I have my service interface with the getPersonInfo method. I have its twin brother, the getPersonInfo async method with the person service async class with the getPersonInfo method as well, but this time with a callback. Next to that, I have defined that method in my own person service client interface, and this person service client interface is implemented in my person service client implementation class, which actually makes my actual RPC call using this method getPersonInfo. And this is also the method that is being invoked inside my main view over here. It is this method. So my main view makes the RPC call to the client implementation class. The client implementation class, using the default callback, invokes the server-side implementation. The server-side implementation actually does nothing more than create an object and returning the information. After which the default callback in this particular case checks what type of object this is, in this particular case a person object. After which he casts it to a person object and simply says to the main view, hey main view, can you open the person info page? After which we are full circle again and the page becomes open. So this was in a nutshell a very quick recap of the architecture that I introduced in my previous tutorial. So having said that, I now actually would like to continue showing what I am making this tutorial for. Before I do, one more thing. This is the person object. As you may remember, objects that are being sent back from the server to the client side need to implement the serializable class, else they will obviously not be serialized. Okay, so now let's go and create these event objects. As you may remember, I said if I'm gonna have two methods that are going to return a person object, I need to wrap them in specific event objects so I know what my GUI has to do. So in this particular case, going back to my presentation, and just to be clear. Oh, by the way, I made this class diagram using NetBeans, an older version of NetBeans. If anybody has a suggestion of a good Eclipse plugin for creating UML diagrams, do send me a message. I'd very much like to know. Okay, so as I said, I have this person object that returns my person information, and depending on whether or not I want to display it in the overview screen that you first saw, I'm going to wrap it in a person retrieved event. If I'm going to display the person information has been updated method page, that was the last page you saw, I'm going to wrap it in a person updated event. And both are inheriting from data event. So let me now show you how this works in code. So I already created an empty events package here, just to save the time. So I'm going to create a new class in there now. And I'm going to name this class data event. And data event is going to very much in line with the person object, because it needs to be serialized. Implement the serializable interface. And other than that, it's not going to do anything at all, because this is a superclass that contains no data onto itself. So I'm going to create another class. And this will be my person retrieved event. Finish. And this person retrieved event is going to inherit from the data event. And other than that, it is going to contain a instance of the class person. Naturally, I have to import that because it was inside my model package. After which I'm going to generate a getter and setter for this particular attribute. And that's pretty much it. So this is going to be our envelope that is going to retrieve the person information when the person information is being simply retrieved. So now let's create his twin brother or sister, depending on what gender you perceive classes to have. I'd like to think they are female because it makes my work more bearable. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, person updated event. did I call it person? Yeah, person updated event, just to stick with my own example. Extends data event. And again, I have to create a person attribute here, and given I am eternally the lazy programmer, I'm just going to copy and paste this code. And that's pretty much it. So now I have two events. Okay, so the trick that I'm going to use right now is actually going to be the following. I'm going to go back to my getPersonInfo object, my person service, and I'm going to change the data type to data event. Alternatively, I could have changed this to person retrieved event, or yeah, in this particular case, person retrieved event. However, by returning the generic type data event, I can actually also use create a specific error object to be returned if something goes wrong using the exact same RPC call. I may dedicate a separate tutorial on that. So for now, let's just for simplicity's sake say that I am going to return a data event object. Next to that, I'm going to create an additional RPC method, update person info, which is going to receive a string name, integer age, and a string gender. Naturally, I'm getting an error now. That's because I have to add it in my async method as well. So void, and again, lazy programmer style. I'm going to copy over these exact parameters. Oops, should not do that too fast. So there we go. So now we have these two methods defined there. Of course I have to implement them on my server side, but I'll be doing that in a moment. Then I have to add it to my interface as well. So again, void, and not async callback in this case. Update person info. So that's that. Then in the client implementation, I'm of course obligated to implement this method. So I'm just going to shift it up a little bit to improve my readability. So there we go. My getPersonInfo and my updatePersonInfo. And like with the getPersonInfo method, I'm going to make my call to my server side, providing the name, the age, the gender, and the default callback. I'll be modifying the callback later. Because right now it still deals with the person object. First of all, I'm going to do my server-side implementation. So, in a real-world scenario, I would actually be updating a database here. Just to keep this example simple, I am simply going to create a new object with the new information, just to simulate it has been updated. Before I do that, however, you may notice I have an error here, and that is because I just changed the return type from person to data event, and therefore I need to modify this method as well. And that's going to cause me more errors because I create my person object, but I can no longer return my person object. So what am I going to do is I'm going to say, well, no, not data event in this case. Person retrieved event, my specific envelope for my data. And I'm going to call it the event. And of course handle my import equals new person retrieved event. And I'm going to use the set the person method in this case. Normally I would have opted for set person as the method name, but since I created a variable dPerson and wasn't paying attention, it's now called setDPerson. Sorry, I need to set the person object I created in there. Finally, I'm going to return the event. And since person retrieved event is a subclass of data event, this will work perfectly fine. So again, like I said, the update person info, in this particular case, I'm just going to create a new object and return it. So again, not to bore all of you, and since I'm too lazy, I'm just going to copy that code. But the only difference is I'm going to set the name to the name provided. I'm going to set the age to the age provided and the gender to the gender provided. The only thing that's different here though is I am going to create a person updated event. And of course I need to handle the import. Then inside this event I'm gonna again set the person to the person info object and return the event. And again, that's not a problem because person updated event also is a subclass of data event. And that's pretty much all I need to do on my server side. So now going back to my client implementation, I need to handle that particular data. In the past I had done this within my default callback doing an if statement, but in this particular case I don't really need to do that anymore. As a matter of fact, I'm going to let the main view sort it out. So the only thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cast this result to data event, or as a matter of fact, even if I want to make it even better, I can even say implements async callback data event. Naturally I'll have to import data event and make some further changes to my onSuccess method. So my onSuccess method will now, instead of receive an object, will receive a data event object, which is a huge trouble saver. So then I will show you why. So what I'm going to do in my main view now is I'm going to create in my main view another public method, public void handle event, data event event, and of course import it. And what my client implementation is going to do is simply pass whatever event he received to the main view. Almost like saying, I received some data, it's not my problem, Mr. Main View, you sort it out please. Sorry, it's not called event, it's called result. Okay, so what does my main view do? Well, my main view will create a if-else statement. Or we'll use an if-else statement to determine what kind of data is coming back. Is it the blue envelope or is it the red envelope? So if event is instance of, in this particular case, data retrieved, sorry, no, not data retrieved, person retrieved event, which naturally has to be imported, then we're going to do a certain thing. Else if event is a instance of person updated event, we're gonna do another thing. And of course I have to import my event first. Okay, this first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cast my data event object to the specific type. So person retrieved event, the event equals the cast of person retrieved event. And what am I casting? The event object. Same thing applies here. Person updated event, the event equals, too long a name to type in again, an event. And what I'm going to do, unlike what I have done previously, I'm going to modify my openPersonInfoPage method. Because the first, I'm going to change my openPersonInfoPage method. I'm going to delete this parameter, and I'm going to delete this as well. As you may have noticed, I have globally declared a person info object. So since it's globally, I don't want to provide it locally anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot person info, which is my global variable, equals the event dot get the person, or getting the person information and storing it in my global variable. Almost like opening up my envelope and taking out the letter. I'm going to do the same thing if the data is coming back through the update event. Again, I'm going to store it globally, but what I'm going to do differently is the next method that I'm going to open. So it's going to be, in this particular case, if it's a person retrieved event, I'm going to open the person info page. And if it's the other method, I am going to, not this one, open the person info saved page. Which actually shows that the information has been updated. So this is basically the whole process of handling my complex data types, and you will see it in working in a moment. Point to remember is, before I continue, have a generic event object in which all your specific events inherit from, and write a method inside your main view that checks which particular event it is, and then take the appropriate next actions. Opening a particular screen or showing a certain message, or whatever you want to do with it. In most cases I would also add a else clausule, which does some generic error handling, just in case the event comes back that I didn't plan for this part of the GUI. It's mostly to help me debug, even though if you write your code properly you will not be needing it. Okay, so now there's only a few more GUI things that I need to set straight. So for that I have to go to my GUI classes, the person info edit page. You may have noticed that when I'm shifting from my display page to my edit page, I'm actually not retrieving the person info anymore. I'm retrieving the person info once, and when it comes back I am saving it globally. So when I open my edit page, this very same global object is provided to the edit page and displayed. This saves me one whole round trip to the server. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And next to that, as a rule, I always retrieve the data first and then provide the data that a page needs to the page itself through the constructor, next to a copy of the main view. And why I'm doing this, please refer to my earlier tutorials. Okay, now I'm really moving on to what I still have left to do. So in my edit page I have some basic GUI code here, and until now, just for demo purposes, I would directly, when I press save, directly open the person info saved page without actually saving the information. But now I have that information, I can just say main view get listener, and the method is update person info, which requires a name, age and gender, which I naturally will have to retrieve. So name is going to be retrieved from, and I think this is where I made a mistake in my application, and I'm very quickly going to set this straight without having to re-record the entire demonstration. I have created text boxes here, but if I'm going to read the data from the text box, I cannot do that because they are locally declared. So very quickly, and again the lazy programmer way, I am simply gonna create them as global variables, making heavy use of copy and paste. So I have my name, age, gender, and I am simply going to initialize them on the spot. So plus, because I may be a lazy programmer, but I'm also a tidy programmer, I'm going to add this in front of it just to indicate that these are global variables. Okay, that should take care of it. So string name is this dot. Of course that will not work. Why this will not work is because I'm inside a private class. So again, I'm just going to create a private void method, save data, with my actual save data code. And I'm simply going to invoke this save data method inside my click handler, and now it should be fine. So this.name, which is my text box, get text. Age has to be an integer. So this.age dot get text. But a string is not an integer, so I need to add a cast to this. Integer dot value of. And then I'm simply going to cast this string to an integer. Finally, I need to get the gender. And for the gender, I'm simply going to say this dot gender, which is my gender text box, get text. And I'm going to provide those to the get listener, to the RPC call that I'm going to make through the listener class. After which the whole process will be kicked in motion. I'm going to make the server call, which is going to create a new person object, wrap it in an event object, send it back to my client. The client will pass it to the main view, and the main view will open the confirm page. Lastly, what I need to do is inside my person info saved page, which just indicates that the person is saved, I want to go full circle and go back to my person info page. As you may remember, I have already saved the updated data that I'm going to get back in a global variable. So in this particular case, I can simply say main view dot open person info page, and it will open the page hopefully with the new data. So let's do the big test and see whether or not I made any mistakes, and run this application. And why do things sometimes go wrong with these tutorials? Well, as I said in my first tutorial, I don't write scripts. I am mostly improvising these tutorials on the spot. Okay, so there we are again. Jack Harkness, age 38, male. I want to edit his information, so I'm going to change from Jack Harkness to Jack Sparrow. And he's 42, and well, let's keep him male. I also would feel kind of sad for Jack Sparrow, so I'm going to save it. And it shows that the person info is saved, just in case, just to check. No errors so far. So now let's see whether or not I made no mistakes at all. Press back, and now it indeed says Jack Sparrow, age 42. Well, just to prove that the gender is also updated, I'll just change it to Jane Sparrow, who is a little bit younger and female. So save again, person info is saved, and yeah, perfectly updated. Okay, before I'm going to end this tutorial, because I did quite a few things that I didn't explain elaborately due to my previous tutorial, I'm going to do a step through based on debug mode, just to give you an idea of what happens everywhere. So again, I am going to go to my main view, and I'm going to create a breakpoint in my constructor so you can see the data being retrieved at startup. And I'm going to add a breakpoint in my handle event. I'm going to add a breakpoint in my get person info, update person info, and my default callback. Finally, I think I'm going to add a breakpoint to each RPC method on the server side. Then I'm going to do a debug as. Okay, so I want to open my debug perspective naturally. Okay, so right now I'm inside my main view constructor, so I'm just going to step over, do some GUI stuff, install my client implementation class, and then I'm going to make the RPC call, which means I'm going to end up in my client implementation class, and the client implementation class is about to invoke, and that's my Chrome plugin. I don't want to stop it. I am going to invoke the server side and invoke the getPersonInfo method. So just continue again. So now we're on the server side, in which I'm creating the person object. I create the person, retrieve the event, set the information, and return the event. After which we're back at the client implementation again, in this case the default callback. And the default callback is going to simply pass it to the main view, for the main view to sort out. So now back again in the main view, where it all started. First we're going to check what sort of event is coming back. So in this case it is a person retrieved event, therefore the if passes. I'm going to get the person information, and okay, didn't see any pop-up. Retrieved in a stored in a global variable, then simply open the open_person_info page. I'll go one step further and do a step into, open_person_info page, step over, in which I will do a step into again. Not in this, oh, that's one step too early. Step into. Okay, anyway, I'll just continue it. And then you can see that Jack Harkness is shown again. So I'm going to edit it, change it to Jack Sparrow, age 42, save. Again, this case I'm invoking the updatePersonInfo method in the client implementation class, which is going to go to the updatePersonInfo method on the server side, which is going to create a new person object, wrap it in the event, and return the event, which again is going to end up in the default callback, as you can see, which will simply pass it to the main view, and the main view will go and check what sort of object it is. So in this case it's not a person retrieved event, but it is a person updated event, after which I cast the object, save the data globally again, and I'm simply going to open up the person info saved page, for which I'm just going to continue. So there we go, person info saved. Now I'm just going to press back and open the view page again, and as you can see, Jack Sparrow is shown again. So I hope that clarifies things a little bit, and I guess with that I will end this demonstration with my usual words that I always say. See you next time.